At the reading of the will, my son handed over $42 million to his wife and sneered, "You're old now. Figure out how to make your own living." But just when I thought I had lost everything, my late husband's attorney revealed a hidden clause that made her shriek in rage. "I'm grateful you're here with me today. Stay until the end and write the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels." Never in my worst nightmares did I expect betrayal from my own flesh and blood, sitting beside me in a lawyer's office on a day that should have been about honoring his father. My name is Eleanor, and at 65 years old, I thought I had endured every curveball life could throw at me. I was wrong. The oak-paneled office felt suffocating as I sank into the heavy leather chair, my fingers trembling as I clutched my handbag. My husband of 42 years had died only a fortnight earlier, and the grief still clawed at me like an open wound that refused to close. Richard had been my anchor, my confidant, the man who built a life for us out of nothing. Mr. Langston, Richard's longtime lawyer, sat stiffly behind his massive desk with a thick folder in front of him, the document that would decide my future. My son, Marcus, 38 years old, sat on my left with his wife, Celeste. I should have felt comforted by their presence, but the atmosphere in that room was colder than winter stone. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mr. Langston began, his tone polite but distant. "Your husband made sure you are well provided for. The estate totals $42 million. The number hit me like a thunderclap. I knew Richard's construction business had done well, but I had never imagined the fortune he had quietly accumulated. $42 million. It was beyond comprehension. "The primary heir is you, Eleanor," Mr. Langston continued, pushing documents toward me. "The house, investments, the company holdings, all in your name." Gratitude mingled with sorrow inside me. Even in death, Richard had taken care of me. But before I could gather my thoughts, Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Langston, there's something that needs to be addressed." I turned to look at him, startled by the sharpness in his tone. His eyes were icy, and I hardly recognized him. Celeste sat poised beside him, her scarlet lips curved into a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "Mother," Marcus said, refusing to meet my eyes. "You don't need all that money. You're 65. What could you possibly do with $42 million? My chest tightened. "Marcus, what are you saying?" Finally, he turned to me, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. "Celeste and I are young. We have goals. We have a future. You're old. It's time you learned to earn your own living instead of clinging to Dad's accomplishments." The words sliced through me like a blade. I gasped, clutching my chest. "Marcus, how can you say this? That money was your father's gift to me." "Technically, yes," Celeste chimed in, her voice syrupy but laced with poison. "But let's be realistic. What would a woman your age do with that kind of wealth? Waste it on doctors or silly hobbies? Maybe bingo nights?" She chuckled, a cruel, hollow laugh that made my skin crawl. I looked desperately around the room for someone to intervene, to remind them how wrong this was. Mr. Langston shuffled his papers nervously, clearly unwilling to interfere in family affairs. "I'm transferring the inheritance to Celeste," Marcus declared as if he were discussing nothing more serious than the weather. "She knows how to manage money. You've never been responsible with finances." It felt like the ground shifted beneath me. My own son, the boy I had carried, raised, and sacrificed everything for, was stripping away my husband's final act of love. "Marcus, please," I whispered. "Your father wanted me to have this." "Dad is gone," he said flatly. "He doesn't want anything anymore. I'll make sure you have enough for a small apartment and basic expenses." "But $42 million? Be realistic." Celeste leaned forward, placing her manicured hand on the desk. "We're protecting you, Eleanor. No stress, no con artists taking advantage of you. You can just live quietly, without responsibilities." Her condescension was suffocating. I searched Marcus's face for the boy who once brought me flowers on Mother's Day, who used to whisper that I was the best mother in the world. But that boy was gone, replaced by a stranger I couldn't recognize. The documents are already ready, Marcus said, sliding papers across the desk. Sign them, and we'll handle everything. My hands shook as I stared at the contracts. 40 years of building a life with Richard, and my son wanted to erase it with one stroke of a pen. The betrayal pierced deeper than Richard's death itself. At least Richard had loved me until his last breath. I need time, I stammered, my voice cracking. There's nothing to think about, Celeste snapped. You were just a housewife. Richard worked while you stayed home. Don't pretend you built any of this. Now sign. Her words burned. They revealed how little they valued the sacrifices I had made, the late nights, the encouragement, the unwavering support that allowed Richard to succeed. But no one in that room cared. I was utterly alone. 3 weeks later, I was boxing up my belongings while Celeste strutted through my kitchen with a clipboard, barking orders at movers like the house was hers, which, according to the papers I had signed in defeat, it now was. The walls that had held 4 decades of memories now felt foreign, as though the soul of the home had died with Richard. Careful with those dishes, Celeste ordered, pointing to my grandmother's china cabinet. Those antiques are priceless. They'll look perfect in our dining room. I froze. My grandmother's china, passed down for 3 generations, was being packed like junk at a yard sale. Celeste, I said softly, fighting tears. Those dishes belonged to my grandmother. They're part of my family history. She gave me a cold smile. Eleanor, sentiment doesn't pay the bills. They're assets. Assets belong to us now. They're heirlooms, I pleaded. My mother gave them to me when I married Richard. And now they're mine, she replied flatly. Don't worry, I'll keep them safe. They'll be in a better home. Marcus entered carrying a box of Richard's books, refusing to meet my eyes. My own son treated me like a stranger. The jewelry appraiser will be here this afternoon, Celeste announced briskly. We'll need values for insurance purposes. My heart sank. What jewelry appraiser? For your collection. The diamonds, the necklaces, the anniversary gifts. They're worth a fortune. I shook my head. Those are my personal keepsakes. My wedding ring. The necklace Richard gave me when we celebrated 20 years. The bracelet he bought when you were born, Marcus. Everything bought during the marriage is community property, Celeste cut me off coldly. Which makes it inheritance property. We're just being practical. I turned to Marcus, begging. Son, please. These aren't assets. They're pieces of my life. For a fleeting moment, guilt flickered in his eyes, but it vanished when Celeste touched his arm. Mom, you're overreacting, he said flatly. They're just things. Dad would want us to be sensible. Just things. My wedding ring. The pearls from my 20th anniversary. The bracelet celebrating Marcus's birth. Just things. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, my voice trembling. We found you a small apartment across town, Celeste said brightly, handing me a slip of paper. 1 bedroom. Cozy. Perfect for a woman your age. The rent is reasonable, Marcus added. We'll cover it for 6 months. 6 months. After 42 years of marriage and sacrifice, I was being given half a year to figure out how to survive. What happens after 6 months? I whispered. Celeste shrugged. You can find a part-time job. Lots of places hire seniors these days. Walmart always needs greeters. The word struck me like a punch. After decades of being the wife of a respected businessman, after hosting dinners for Richard's clients, I was being reduced to welcoming strangers in a discount store. I haven't worked in 30 years, I said, panic lacing my voice. Who would hire me now? That's not our problem, Celeste said smoothly, her false sympathy slipping. You chose to stay home instead of building a career. Now you'll face the consequences. I stood frozen as movers carried out Richard's golf clubs, his cherished first editions, even his leather chair where he had spent countless mornings. Piece by piece, my life was dismantled. And the worst part wasn't losing the money or the home. It was realizing that my own son had become someone I no longer knew. The little boy who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, who sobbed when I dropped him off at college, who once told me I was the strongest woman he knew, that boy no longer existed. Oh, and Eleanor, Celeste called out as I climbed the stairs to finish packing my bedroom, the moving truck arrives at 8 tomorrow morning. Be ready. I nodded silently, not trusting my voice. As I ascended to the room Richard and I had shared for decades, I heard Celeste downstairs, her shrill voice carrying through the house as she spoke on the phone, likely with an interior decorator, discussing her plans for our bedroom. My sanctuary had become her next project. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The family photos on the nightstand. The novels Richard used to read aloud to me on lazy Sunday mornings. The window seat where I had spent countless hours watching the garden bloom and fade with the seasons. Tomorrow, all of it would be gone. Tomorrow, I would wake in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with 6 months' rent paid, no savings, and no roadmap for starting over at 65. I had devoted my life to my son, and he had discarded me. But as dusk crept across the room, something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage exactly, more like a steel-cold resolve. I had survived losing Richard. I would survive this, too. And perhaps one day, Marcus and his calculating wife would realize just how foolish it was to underestimate me. For months into my new life, the full cruelty of Celeste's scheme became clear. The apartment was as soulless as she had described, small, functional, beige. Beige walls, beige carpets, beige cupboards. Living inside it felt like being trapped in a cardboard box. Each morning, I woke disoriented, expecting for one blissful second to see the familiar wallpaper of my old bedroom. I tried to decorate, placing the few trinkets Celeste had deemed worthless enough to let me keep. But it was like trying to plant roses in concrete. Worse than the emptiness was the loneliness. Once, I had been surrounded by neighbors who knew me, Richard's business partners and their wives, the women from my book club and bridge nights. Now, I was invisible, just another older woman forgotten in a block of strangers. I tried calling friends, but the conversations were brittle. How could I admit that my own son had cast me aside? How could I tell them that the life they had once admired had crumbled into dust? Eleanor, dear, we've missed you at the country club, said Marjorie Hale during one awkward phone call. We had been friends for 20 years, serving together on countless charity boards. I've been going through some changes, I replied vaguely. Well, you must come to the spring gala, she chirped. Patricia Morrison is chairing this year, and her taste is exquisite. I mumbled something about checking my schedule and ended the call quickly. How could I tell her I couldn't even afford the membership fees anymore? That I was rationing what little Richard had left in our checking account just to get by? But it was what came next that revealed the true depth of Celeste's malice. At the grocery store, clutching coupons and comparing prices, something I had never done in all my married years, I ran into Janet Morrison, Patricia's daughter. She greeted me warmly. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry about Mr. Whitmore. Truly, my condolences. Thank you, dear. That's kind of you, I said softly. But, well, my mother mentioned something odd, she continued hesitantly. Apparently, Marcus's wife reached out about some charity fund. She said you might need help. Financial help. My stomach lurched. What sort of help? Janet shifted uncomfortably. She suggested perhaps the church's senior assistance program. For groceries. Or utility bills. Humiliation washed over me so fiercely I thought I might collapse right there in the cereal aisle. Celeste wasn't satisfied with taking my home, she was parading me as a beggar, turning me into a spectacle. And to be honest, Janet added awkwardly, I was confused because I saw Marcus and Celeste at the Ferrari dealership last month. They seemed to be doing very well. Her words confirmed my worst fears. While they flaunted Richard's fortune, they painted me as destitute. That afternoon, I called Marcus for the first time since leaving the house. The phone rang 4 times before his voice came through, sharp and cold. What do you want, Mom? The iciness still shocked me. Marcus, I need to talk. Celeste has been telling people I need charity. She's humiliating me. Our friends? He scoffed. Mother, those people were Dad's colleagues. They tolerated you because of his influence, not because of you. His cruelty stabbed like knives. That isn't true. Marjorie and I have been close for decades. Marjorie says it's uncomfortable when you call. That you're always whining about your situation. He cut me off. I hadn't called Marjorie in weeks. The realization that I was now seen as a burden broke something inside me. Why is Celeste doing this? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Because you do need help, Marcus replied coldly. You're 65 with no skills, no career. Celeste was trying to soften the blow by making sure people knew you were in transition. My life was being Richard's wife. Your mother. That was my choice. Dad is dead. I'm married. Your job is over. The brutality of those words knocked the breath from my lungs. Marcus, I whispered, I am still your mother. That doesn't end just because you married her. You're right, he said flatly. For a heartbeat, hope flickered, until he added, you are still my mother, but I don't owe you a living. I don't owe you Dad's money. And I don't owe you my time. I never said you owed me anything. I just want my son back. This is who I've always been. You just never noticed, too busy playing the perfect housewife. And then the line went dead. I sat frozen in my beige apartment, grieving not only Richard but also Marcus, the son I had raised, who no longer existed. That night, staring at the ceiling in my narrow bed, I wondered how I would endure. Financially, emotionally, spiritually, everything had been ripped away. Had Richard known? Had he seen this side of Marcus and said nothing? And if he had, why hadn't he protected me? But just before sleep took me, a quiet thought whispered through my mind, maybe he did. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months after I had signed away my home in Mr. Langston's office. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by job applications, part-time cashier, grocery stocker, even fast food work, each reminder of how far I had fallen. I assumed it was my landlord, Mr. Chin, coming to talk about my lease. Bracing for the conversation I dreaded, I opened the door. Instead, a tall, silver-haired gentleman stood there in a navy suit, a leather briefcase in hand. His sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses studied me kindly. Mrs. Whitmore, he asked politely. Yes. My name is Jonathan Ashcroft. I was your late husband's private attorney. I frowned. But Mr. Langston handled Richard's will. I don't understand. Mr. Ashcroft gave a small, knowing smile. Yes. Mr. Langston managed the formal estate. I handled other matters, special matters. May I come in? Something in his tone urged me to step aside. He entered, setting his briefcase on the table, moving my job applications out of the way. Mrs. Whitmore, forgive me for waiting so long. Your husband left very specific instructions about when and under what conditions I was to contact you. My pulse quickened. What instructions? He opened the folder and looked at me gravely. 2 years ago, Richard came to me. He was deeply troubled by changes he saw in your son, particularly after Marcus married Celeste. My breath caught. What sort of changes? He noticed Marcus growing dismissive of you. Obsessed with material wealth. And he feared what might happen when he was no longer here. Richard was terrified of what might happen to you if Marcus ever got hold of the family wealth, Mr. Ashcroft said quietly. He opened the folder and slid out a document I'd never seen. This is a contingent bequest, Mrs. Whitmore. It was drafted to operate alongside the formal will Mr. Langston presented. My fingers trembled as I stared at the pages. I don't follow. Your husband was shrewd, he went on. He hoped his instincts about Marcus were wrong, but he refused to leave you unprotected if they weren't. So he set up a safeguard, what he called a test. A test? The word felt strange in my mouth. Mr. Ashcroft leaned forward, his expression solemn. The portion Marcus thought he inherited was never absolute. He was never told this. For 6 months after Richard's passing, Marcus's conduct toward you would determine the outcome. If he treated you with dignity, ensured you were comfortable and looked after, his inheritance would vest permanently. My breath seized. And if he didn't? If he abandoned you, demeaned you, or left you in financial hardship, then everything would revert to you. Moreover, assets Richard set aside for precisely this scenario would also transfer to your sole control. The room tipped and steadied. Additional assets? For the first time since he'd arrived, Mr. Ashcroft's mouth curved in a faint smile. Your husband's success exceeded anything you were shown. The $42 million was the visible portion. Quietly, over years, he invested in ventures under separate entities, acquired properties, and built what amounts to a second fortune. He withdrew another bundle of papers. Given that the conditions have been unmistakably violated, you become the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at approximately $60 million. I couldn't find air. $60 million. More than I had ever imagined, more than Richard had ever told me. The 6-month period ended yesterday, Mr. Ashcroft continued. Per Richard's instructions, I've been observing. I know about your apartment. I know how Celeste targeted your reputation. I know how Marcus spoke to you. Your husband's fears were, regrettably, well-founded. Tears rose, hot and relentless, not joy, not yet, but something like vindication. Richard had seen what I had refused to see. And he had shielded me. There is more, Mr. Ashcroft said gently. Marcus and Celeste have been operating under the illusion that their control was permanent. They've been exuberant. Multiple luxury vehicles. High-end jewelry. International trips. And considerable renovations to the house. I pictured Janet at the grocery store, the Ferrari logo flashing in my mind. How much? By my accounting, nearly $8 million in 6 months, he replied. Funds they will be required to return with interest, as those monies were never legally theirs to spend. The sheer scope of it staggered me. Not only would I be safe, Marcus and Celeste would answer for their greed. What happens next? I asked. Now, he said, arranging the documents in a neat stack, you signed to activate the contingent provisions. The business, the investments, the house, everything Richard built reverts to you. All expenditures Marcus and Celeste made during the past 6 months become debts owed back to the estate. My hand shook as I took the pen. Will they go to prison? That depends on how they respond and on prosecutorial discretion, he said. At minimum, the financial repercussions will be severe. They will lose the house, the cars, everything purchased with funds to which they had no legal claim. As I signed, a dull ache pulsed behind my ribs. Richard had understood our son more clearly than I had. He'd seen the entitlement I'd excused, the hollowness I'd ignored. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Ashcroft said as he gathered the completed papers, Richard left a personal note for you, only to be delivered if this day came. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name in Richard's unmistakable hand. I opened it and read aloud, my voice breaking. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then our son has revealed who he has become. I am sorry for your pain. I hoped to be wrong about Marcus, but I feared I was not. You deserved better from the child we raised. You have always been the strongest person I know. You will rebuild with grace. The money is only money. You, my love, are beyond price. Always, Richard. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it to my heart. Even from beyond this life, Richard was still holding me up. What do I do now? I whispered. He smiled. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, you reclaim your life. The call came 3 days later at 7 in the morning. I sat at my small table, though not for long, sipping coffee and reviewing the financial summaries Mr. Ashcroft had left. 60 million. Even after 3 days, the figure still felt unreal. Mom. Marcus's voice sounded different, frayed with panic. The clipped indifference I'd grown used to was gone. Good morning, Marcus. Something's wrong with Dad's estate, he blurted. We need to talk right now. I set my cup down. What's wrong? Our accounts are frozen. The bank says there's some legal hold. They told me to contact an attorney named Ashcroft. A calm, steady warmth spread through me. I see. You need to call Langston, he snapped. Figure out what's going on. This is your husband's money we're talking about. Your husband's money. Not our father's. Not family. The phrasing told me everything, even in his terror. Actually, I said, I already know. Silence. Then, a strangled, what do you mean you know? I mean there was a contingency. I know that you never actually inherited anything. I know you and Celeste burned through $8 million that never belonged to you. The silence lengthened. Celeste's voice rose in the background, sharp, furious, too muffled to make out the words. That's impossible, Marcus said finally. Langston read the will. Everything was left to you, and you transferred it to us. I transferred what I believed was a valid inheritance, I replied. But there was a second instrument, Marcus, a contingent will. Your father put you to a test. A test? His voice cracked. If, after his death, you had treated me with care, ensured I was comfortable and secure, everything would have been yours permanently. But if you abandoned me, shamed me, or left me struggling, I let the pause hang like a blade. Then it all returned to me. No, his protest was barely a breath. Dad wouldn't have done that. Your father knew you better than I did, I said softly. He saw what I refused to see, that money meant more to you than family. Celeste's shriek cut through the line, lawyers, lawsuits, threats. I could picture her, livid, porcelain mask cracking. Mom, you can't do this, Marcus said, and for the first time in months I heard something real underneath the bluster. We've spent money. We have commitments. The renovations, the cars. Yes, I said. $8 million worth. With funds that were never yours. That's called theft. It's not theft, you signed the transfer. I signed thinking it was legitimate. Because the inheritance was conditional and the conditions failed, your paperwork is meaningless. You've been spending stolen money. Something crashed on his end, glass, maybe, or a vase flung in fury. Please, we can fix this, Marcus begged. We can make arrangements. Better arrangements for you. We made mistakes, but we're family. Family. Now, when everything was caving in, the word was suddenly convenient. Where was family when you pushed me out of my home? When you told me to go earn my own living? When Celeste announced to my friends that I needed charity? We were wrong, he said quickly. But you have to understand, we have obligations now. The mortgage, the obligations you created with money that wasn't yours. A long pause. When he spoke again, the panic had curdled into anger. You and Dad set this up to trap me. Your father designed a shield to protect me from what you did, I answered. If there was a trap, you baited it with your greed. So now you'll ruin your own son. Your family. You shattered this family when you chose wealth over your mother. I'm only taking back what your father intended me to have. There was a scuffle, and then Celeste's voice came through, high, venomous, shaking with rage. You bitter old woman. You won't take what's ours. We'll fight you in court. We'll prove you manipulated Richard, that you poisoned him against his own son. Good luck, Celeste, I said calmly. Richard made these arrangements 2 years before he became ill. His concerns about Marcus are documented thoroughly. This is extortion. It's blackmail. No, dear, I said. It's accountability. I ended the call, my hands steady for the first time in months. Less than an hour later, someone pounded on my door. I looked through the peephole. Marcus stood in the hall, hollow-eyed, as if he hadn't slept. Celeste looked wild, like a woman staring over the edge of a cliff as the ground gave way beneath her. I opened the door only partway, the chain still latched. Celeste's face was pale, streaked with tears. Please, Mrs. Whitmore, let us in. We just need to talk, rationally. We're desperate. If you take this money, we'll lose everything. Everything you bought with stolen funds? I asked quietly. Yes, she admitted without shame, her voice trembling. Marcus leaned in close, his eyes red. Mom, I said things I shouldn't have. I hurt you. But I'm still your son, your only child. Dad would want you to take care of me. Your father made it very clear what he wanted, Marcus, I said evenly. He wanted you to face the consequences of what you've done. Celeste's voice turned frantic. We'll make it right. We'll buy you a new house. Give you a generous allowance. You'll be comfortable. Just don't take everything away. With my own money? I stared at her through the narrow crack. Even at the edge of ruin, she couldn't see it. To her, everything was a transaction, a negotiation. She had no understanding that what Richard had left behind was more than wealth, it was trust, respect, dignity. The attorneys will reach out soon, I said coldly. You'll have 30 days to vacate my home. Marcus's voice cracked. Mom, that's my childhood house. I grew up there. And I spent 40 years in it with your father, I replied. It was our life together, and you stripped it from me without hesitation. I began to close the door, but Marcus's voice rose desperately. Wait! What do you want? Tell me what it would take to fix this. I studied his face, the man who once had been my little boy, and knew in that moment he was a stranger to me. I want you to understand what you did. I want you to know how it feels to be cast aside by the people you trusted most. To lose everything because your own family decided you weren't worth keeping. Celeste's fear curdled into fury. Then we'll go to court. We'll fight this until the end. With what resources? I asked quietly. Every account is frozen. Even your retainer belongs to me now. I closed the door and slid the chain across. Their pounding and shouting continued for a few minutes, then silence. For the first time in months, I felt peace. 6 months later, I stood once again in the garden of my home, watching the morning sky blaze pink and gold. The roses Richard had planted for our 20th anniversary were in full bloom, as though celebrating my return. The house itself seemed to breathe easier. I had spent weeks stripping away Celeste's cold renovations, restoring the warmth Richard and I had built together. It was still the same walls, the same memories, but the suffocating weight of her presence was gone. The court process had been swift. With Mr. Ashcroft's meticulous documentation, the contingent will was unassailable. Marcus and Celeste had no grounds, no leverage. The house returned to me in 60 days. The cars were seized. Celeste's jewelry, bought with estate money, was repossessed and auctioned. Even her renovations were tallied against them. In the end, they owed the estate nearly $12 million, a debt they could never hope to clear. One afternoon, as I walked the garden path, I saw Marjorie Hale approach. She looked uncertain, stripped of her usual polished confidence. "Eleanor," she said softly, "thank you for seeing me. I had avoided most of my old circle since coming home." The sting of their gossip, of their easy belief in Celeste's lies, was still raw. Marjorie sat beside me on the bench, nervously smoothing her skirt. "I owe you an apology." "Several, actually. When Celeste called, she painted a picture of you as unstable, stubborn, needing intervention. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. It was easier than questioning things. I said nothing, waiting. I was jealous," she confessed. "You and Richard had something real. My marriage to Charles has always been an arrangement. When I heard you were struggling, part of me felt relief. It made me feel less alone in my own unhappiness." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong. About everything." Her honesty surprised me, and though my anger eased, it did not vanish. "I've heard what really happened," she continued. "About Marcus. About the will. I can't imagine how much that must have hurt." "It hurt," I said, "but not as much as realizing how easily my friends dismissed me." Marjorie lowered her gaze. "What can I do to make it right?" "Nothing," I answered, watching her flinch. "You can't undo what's been done. But going forward, treat me as the friend you've known for 20 years, not as a charity project." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Of course. Always." After she left, I walked through my house, touching familiar objects. Richard's books back on the shelves. My grandmother's china in its place. The photographs Celeste had hidden, restored to view. It wasn't just about reclaiming possessions, it was reclaiming myself. For 6 months, I had been told I was worthless, too old, a burden. And I had nearly believed it. But at 66, I discovered I was more than Richard's wife or Marcus's mother. I was Eleanor Whitmore, and that was enough. I joined a book club at the public library, women who loved stories rather than status. I volunteered teaching adults to read. I traveled to places Richard and I had once dreamed of. Most importantly, I learned to stand alone without loneliness. The calls from Marcus had come for a while, pleading, angry, manipulative, but I learned to recognize regret for consequences, not actions. By the 3rd month, the calls stopped. Celeste had left him, retreating to her parents' home, filing for divorce, and blaming Marcus for everything. He was left in a small apartment, working at a car dealership, the first steady job he'd held in years. Sometimes, late at night, I thought of my son and felt a dull ache. But the boy who once picked wildflowers for me was gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. One warm evening in spring, nearly a year after Richard's passing, I sat on the porch with a book. A figure came slowly up the drive. Marcus, thinner, older, his clothes wrinkled, his face worn. "Hello, Mom," he said softly. "Marcus." He lingered at the bottom step, not daring to come closer. "You look happy." "I am," I replied truthfully. He nodded. "I've been thinking about Dad. About why he did what he did. And I think I understand now. He saw who I was becoming. He tried to protect you from me. And he was right." I studied his face. For once, there was no performance. Only exhaustion and regret. I threw away the most important thing I had, for money. And not even mine. Money that never belonged to me. He sank onto the step. "Meadow," Celeste left. She said I ruined her life. But I ruined my own. I ruined us. I watched him, searching for manipulation, for false contrition. But what I saw was defeat that felt real. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I know what I did can't be undone. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not for the money. For what I did to you. He rose slowly. I should go. At the edge of the drive, he turned back. Oh, and Mom. Dad was right about something else. You are the strongest person I know. I watched him vanish into the dusk. I felt sadness for him, but not the grief I once feared. Some bridges cannot be rebuilt. Some trust, once shattered, cannot be restored. And I had learned to accept that. That night, sitting in my garden, surrounded by Richard's roses, I realized what I had truly gained. Not just wealth, not just vindication, but something priceless, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I was 66 years old. And for the first time, I was free. Free from fear, from the need to prove myself, from defining my value through others. The roses Richard had planted continued to bloom, and I was finally ready to tend my own garden. Now, to you listening, what would you do in my place? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rediscover your strength? Share your story in the comments below. And before you leave, I've left 2 other stories on the final screen, favorites of this channel that I know will astonish you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.